The warrior is back, baby. It's time to talk about paperbacks and the craziness of collecting vintage fiction from a lifetime ago. This show's an offshoot of the Paperback Warrior blog where you can find thousands of reviews and articles about books across multiple genres. You can play the prior 105 episodes there or on any streaming platform, probably the one that you're using right now. You can also follow us on Facebook, X, and YouTube for updates weekly. So, let's get to it. Today's episode is on a respected and highly touted author named Jack Finney. His career is punctuated by the film franchise Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which was based off of his own hit novel, The Body Snatchers. Finney wrote many science fiction and heist novels and had a penchant for time travel. We'll celebrate his life and career with a colorful feature today that includes short reviews of 4 of his novels, and we're going to look at a few short stories. In addition, I'm reviewing the novelette Nightmare on Ice by John S. Glasby. It was originally published in 1963, and it's the lead story in the brand new Pulp Adventures number 45, which is out now through Bold Venture Press. I'm also going to tell you about my most recent book acquisitions and what's coming out for new releases. Story time. I know you guys like story time. Story time returns for this episode. I'm going to put it on at the end. And to tie into the feature, I'm going to read you a short story by Jack Finney titled The Third Level. You're going to love this story. It's fascinating. Okay, so tying into this podcast episode today, I've also posted a 20-minute shopping video. Now, these videos, I've been trying to really revamp our YouTube channel. I've been putting up loads and loads of videos. You'll find a ton of shorts, which are a minute or less, on book covers, brief histories of authors, some things that you've probably heard on the podcast before, but just sort of repurposed into visual aids. And so you'll find a 20-minute shopping video on my recent trip to a small rural town in central Florida, just north of Orlando, called Micanopy. Be sure to watch that video because it has loads and loads of vintage paperback book covers and all the photos that I took inside of this giant antique mall. I went there a couple years ago and I pulled out a large haul of vintage paperbacks. I've been wanting to return to see what books have arrived since I've been there the last time. This tiny town has a giant antique shopping mall and the place is crammed with books. They have tons of first edition or signed hardcovers. The booths are well stocked with vintage Western, horror, science fiction, fantasy, and 1970s and 1980s action, adventure, and crime fiction. I ended up buying 6 books there, including including a Holy Grail book to add to my collection. But be sure to check out the video, and I'll post links to the video in the same places that you'll find this podcast episode. Beyond my shopping trip to the antique mall, I've also picked up a few books here and there. First up, let me grab it here. First up is a vintage paperback I bought online called Terror at Sea. It was published by Signet in 1981 and written by Dean W. Ballinger. He authored westerns and also the men's action adventure series called Gannon. The book's cover art has a sinking ship on it with sharks. Looks like they're feeding on the survivors of the ship. The blurb says, "In a novel of excruciating horror, a great ship is torpedoed and American sailors are eaten alive by blood-frenzied sharks." The book's introduction says the novel's based on a true incident involving the sinking of the USS Indianapolis on July 29, 1945. 1,195 crewmen survived the sinking and were left floundering in the ocean to be eaten by sharks. It equaled 100 men per day eaten by sharks over the course of 5 days. In the intro, it says that Ballinger himself had personal experience with this sinking because he was a correspondent for the Navy and participated in the rescue of the Indianapolis survivors. This book is a fictionalized account of that incident. It sounds gruesome, but honestly looks like a riveting read. Okay, I have also a stack of new books coming out from Starkhouse Press that are sitting right here on my desk. The first up is Retreat from Oblivion by David Goodis. This will be released next month. This was the very first novel by Goodis and was published in 1939. The description explains it as the story of seven self destructive people whose lives tragically intersect in pre World War II in New York City. I also have a twofer by W.R. Burnett. The books in this volume consist of Night Without Morning, which was originally published as a substantially different novel called The Cool Man by Fawcett Gold Medal in 1968, and the other book in this is called Round the Clock at Volaris, which was also published by Fawcett Gold Medal back in 1961. This twofer will be released in November. Also from Starkhouse Press, I have a Black Gat book called Remembered Anger by Martha Albrand. This is Black Gat book number 63. It was originally published in 1946 and it's going to be released in November. The synopsis sounds terrific. It says Chet Burton had been betrayed. He had parachuted into France but was captured immediately by the Germans and spent the last 3 years in a prisoner of war camp. Now that the war is over, he's back in Paris looking for the traitor who betrayed him. Also, from author Jarrett Keene, I have his first two installments of his Kid Crimson Western title. The first is called Gunpowder Mountain, which I reviewed on the Paperback Warrior blog last month, and the second book in the series is called The Guns of Goblin Valley. I haven't read that one yet, but hope to get to it soon and do a review. Both of those books are published by Wolfpack Publishing, and I'm thankful to have the physical copies because they're really gorgeous on my bookshelf. The covers are by Claudio Bergamin, I may not be saying that name right, who also did covers for bands like Judas Priest and Kiss. I'm a heavy metal guy, so that makes me really happy. I will say if you like adventure western titles like Fargo, then Kid Crimson is right up your alley. Keene also sent me his book Hammer of the Dogs from 2023. It was published by University of Nevada Press. It's a dystopian novel starring a 21-year-old girl fighting deadly drones on the Las Vegas strips of wasteland. It sounds amazing. I just recently started it, and it's really good so far. If you like sort of science fiction, post-apocalyptic stuff with robots, droids, yeah, it's really good. I can't really explain it, but I'm going to review it. I also received another contemporary novel, this one from Terrence Lehue, titled One Man's Treasure. According to Lehue, it's a swashbuckling treasure hunt with modern pirates, beautiful women, and sword fights. The book was released on September the 3rd, which was also my birthday. How about that? All right, so down to business. Let's get into a feature right after this moody music plays. Okay, today's feature is on author Jack Finney, who lived from 1911 until 1995. His best-known work is The Body Snatchers and Time and Again. I've read a handful of Finney's novels, and I always found him to be a real pleasure to read. It was long past due that I did a feature on this amazing author. Jack Finney was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He attended Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, and graduated in 1934. By 1947, Finney had been employed as a copywriter in the advertising agency of Dancer Fitzgerald Sample for 12 years. Finney's transition into writing fiction occurred when he discovered an Ellery Queen annual contest to discover new writers. He was awarded a special prize for a first published story. Finney's first published work was a short story called Someone Who Knows Told Me, which was published by Cosmopolitan in the December 1943 issue. This story is interesting because it echoed the War Advertising Council's campaign of Loose Lips Sink Ships during World War II. Finney was doing his part to support the war effort. From 1943 through 1952, Finney had 30 short stories published in glossy magazines like Cosmopolitan, Collier's, Good Housekeeping, Ladies' Home Journal, and Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine. A lot of these short stories would eventually be featured in collections or anthologies. Finney's first serial appeared in July through September of 1953 in Good Housekeeping. It was titled Five Against the House. This serial was compiled as the novel of the same name and published in hardcover by Doubleday & Company in 1954. It was then adapted into a 1955 film by Columbia Pictures. I reviewed the book on the blog, and I'll summarize it for you here. A young college kid named Al joins his pack of friends in fantasizing about robbing a payroll truck and then making off with the stolen money to create a better life. They put this entire make believe plan into a loose sketch and then decide to physically follow the truck around town, watching its various stops. Needless to say, art becomes reality. The kids love the plan so much that they begin to think that they can pull off an actual heist. Their target is a casino in Reno called Harold's Club. The book's first half has the kids planning the holdup, the escape route, and so forth. The second half is the heist itself and the aftermath of the heist. This book was a lot of fun to read, and it isn't as violent as, say, Dan Marlowe or Donald Westlake. Instead, Finney concentrates on the human study of the emotion, the guilt, the loyalty, and the integrity that defines both Al and his counterpart, Brick. There's also a love interest named Tina that sparks Al's motivation to get wealthy quick. The following year is when Finney really hits the big time. His follow-up to the successful Five Against the House is a science fiction / horror serial called The Body Snatchers. It was published in Collier's from November through December of 1954. The serial was then published under the same title in hardback by Dell in 1955. The book was such a hit that it was adapted into a film in 1956 using the familiar title of The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Then other film adaptations appeared in 1978 with, I believe, Donald Sutherland, 1993, which was a little bit different. I think it was set on a military base. And then 2007, which I hear is awful. It's just called The Invasion. It was also the basis for the 1998 film The Faculty, which I really loved. I read the book recently, and I really, really liked it. The book is set in the Northern California county of Marin, or Marin, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. The main character is a 20-something divorced doctor named Miles. The beginning of the book has an old high school flame named Becky visiting his practice. She's also divorced, and the two have a romantic chemistry. Becky's worried about her cousin and tells Miles that her cousin believes that the man claiming to be her uncle is not really her uncle. He looks the same, he acts the same, he even talks the same, but something's just different about him. Later, Miles receives more patients claiming that their friends or loved ones have been replaced by an identical person or thing. Miles feels this is all ridiculous until he visits a guy named Jack. Inside Jack's home, Miles discovers a body laying on a pool table, but it doesn't have any identifying features. It's like it's still being formed or made. Jack claims that the body was actually infant-sized a few hours before Miles' arrival. Eventually, Jack's wife, Miles, and Becky find seed pods around town that suggest aliens are being created to look like humans in an attempt to integrate themselves secretly into human society. I really loved this book, and it had a creepy vibe for the first half. The second half of the book is more like a flight or die sort of thing as the foursome try to leave town and then eventually talk with the alien imposters to discover what their overall plan is. The book's ending is a real letdown, though, and I felt like Finney just didn't have an ending to the book. His scientific explanation for the aliens' arrival just doesn't make any sense when you compare it to the book's ending. This is a common complaint that this book gets, but nonetheless, it doesn't ruin the entertainment factor that the book showcases. This is an absolute must-read. If you're a reader, you gotta read this book. Jack Finney goes back to short stories in 1955 and the first part of 1956, with 5 published stories in the pages of Good Housekeeping and Collier's. His next big hit is House of Numbers, which was a novel featured in the July 1956 issue of Cosmopolitan. That same year, the book was published by Dell. A year later, the book was adapted into a film of the same name starring Jack Palance. I read and reviewed this book for the blog as well. The novel stars a young man named Arnie who cashes a bunch of bad checks in an effort to buy his girlfriend an engagement ring. He gets hammered by the courts, and he's sent to California's San Quentin prison for check fraud. According to the novel, the way it worked back then was a convicted felon had a record listed as the number of years they were sentenced for with the words to life added at the end. So Arnie's record is 5 years to life. This is important because Arnie ends up getting into a fight with a prison warden. Anyone with a life sentence on their record, which Arnie does, technically, will get the death penalty by lethal injection for assaulting a prison warden. This is when Arnie's brother Ben becomes involved. Ben looks a lot like Arnie. The idea is for Ben to break Arnie out of San Quentin prison, but to do it involves Ben replacing Arnie in prison so Arnie can create a way to get out of jail. It sounds complicated, but it really isn't. It's a really cool plot. It also involves Arnie's girlfriend, who has now fallen in love with Ben. Imagine that, going to prison trying to buy your girl a ring, and your girl ends up falling in love with your brother while you're doing time. Terrible scenario. But this is a really enjoyable book and has a sensational storyline. I love this book. Finney goes back to short stories and sees 10 of his stories published from 1956 until 1959 in the Saturday Evening Post, Collier's, and Good Housekeeping. Also, a short story collection is published in 1957 titled The Third Level. The lead story in that collection I'm going to read for you at the end of this episode. From August through September of 1959, the Saturday Evening Post publishes Finney's serial titled The U-19's Last Kill. This was later published as Assault on a Queen by Simon & Schuster the same year as a hardcover. In 1966, the book was adapted into a film starring Frank Sinatra. This is another of Finney's books that I really like. The book is presented in first-person narrative by Hugh. Or Hugh? How do you say that name? I never really understood. Is it Hugh or Hugh? I'm going to say Hugh. A former Navy lieutenant that served in World War II. He's floundering from job to job and date to date. He runs into a man named Vic that also served in the Navy as well. The two strike up a conversation, and Vic takes Hugh to a shoreside house where he's introduced to military veterans from England, Germany, and Italy. It's quite the motley crew. There's also a woman named Rosa with the group as well. So why are all these half-dozen military veterans assembled together in the seaside house? Well, the deal is that the German, which is a guy named Loeffner, has found the U-boat sub he commanded in the war. It's on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, just a few miles from the Jersey coast. They want to bring the submarine to the surface, rehaul it, and make it operational again. But why? Why do they want to do this? This is the part that's withheld from the reader until around, let's say, page 110. And the book's 196 pages, so you're pretty far into the book before you really kind of get the idea behind it. But not to give too much away, they plan on using the submarine to threaten an English passenger ship. Now, if you've stuck with me so far, the theme of 2 of the 3 books I discussed earlier was a heist or breakout, so this book has the same sort of feel to it. This was such a great novel. I loved all the characters and how they were able to put aside their histories in the war to form a loyalty to each other in this new endeavor that they started. It's a great book. Now, with these 4 books I just summarized for you, there's a theme running through all of them. The theme, from my perspective anyway, is average people wanting to live different lives. They all dream about life as someone else. In these books, the characters dream of being wealthy or being independent people and not having to rely on 9-to-5 jobs to keep them afloat. I totally get it. Trust me. They see an alternate future for themselves. Even in the Body Snatchers, there's a neat little side story of how the small town actually had hopes of being much bigger and wealthier with a planned interstate that would have brought more commerce and traffic. It's Finney's niche, in my opinion, and it never really gets old, and it always stays true to form. That is the experience of wanting a better life and doing anything necessary to achieve that. But the end result always leads to guilt, shame, and a sense of unforgiveness. Finney mastered the formula. Now, Finney had 13 more short stories published after Assault on a Queen. These appeared in McCall's, Playboy, and the Saturday Evening Post. Finney's other novels were Good Neighbor Sam, The Woodrow Wilson Dime, Marion's Wall, The Night People, and two successful time travel novels called Time and Again and the sequel From Time to Time. There was also 5 short story collections, and Finney wrote 2 plays. Now, other than The Body Snatchers, Finney's most well-known novel is Time and Again. I haven't read it, but as I mentioned earlier, it's a time travel novel. It stars a sketch artist named Simon that's hired by the U.S. Army to participate in a secret project. The project is the ability to send people back through time through self hypnosis to see how it affects people in the present. Simon is sent to New York City in 1882 and journeys back and forth from the present to the past. Simon ends up in a murder investigation involving a woman that Simon falls in love with being blackmailed by a guy named Pickering. There's also a mystery of a world fire that links to a letter that Simon's present girlfriend possesses. What was interesting not only about the story was the presentation. Now, the book was published in 1970 as an illustrated novel, with photos and sketches in the book explained by the author as being real, although not all of them being from the year 1882. Now, Stephen King cites this book as inspiration for his novel 11/22/63, and he also cites Finney's The Third Level as inspiration as well. I believe he talks about Finney in his nonfiction book called Danse Macabre. King's short story, The Ledge, pays homage to Finney's short story, Contents of the Dead Man's Pocket. You can read more about Finney's writing in a book titled Stealing Through Time, On the Writings of Jack Finney by Jack Seabrook. My references for this feature was The Wayback Machine, which gave me an untitled fan page someone created about Finney and his work. I also used an article in a 1947 issue of Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction, Stephen King's Danse Macabre, and the books in my own collection. Stay tuned at the end of this episode again for my reading of Finney's The Third Level story. I hope you enjoyed this feature on Jack Finney, and I hope that you will pursue his work and read it. Again, if you like science fiction time travel, there's plenty there that he offers you. If you want the crime fiction heist story, you're going to love the books that I just mentioned earlier in the feature. All right, so moving on to this episode's review. I just recently purchased my copy of Pulp Adventures number 45. I believe this came out earlier this year, maybe earlier this summer. It's published by Bold Venture Press. They do such a great job with this magazine, and I know it requires a lot of time and effort. This issue contains pulp fiction stories from E.C. Tubb, Shelley Smith, Ernest Dudley, and contemporary stories from authors like Jack Halliday and Michael Wexler. There's also a Rough Edges article written by author James Reasoner reviewing 3 novels. I chose to review this issue's lead novelette. It's titled Nightmare on Ice and was authored by John S. Glaspie and originally was published in Supernatural Stories in 1963. The pseudonym used then was Peter Laneham. Alright, so the story features 5 men living at a research station miles from civilization in the Arctic. There's 3 scientists, a mechanic, and a meteorologist. Inside this base sits 3 main buildings, and each of the tiny buildings is connected by a dark, narrow tunnel. So there's the lab, the living quarters, and then the storehouse. One of the guys mentions that he can hear animal noises outside the doors, which is unusual considering the area is in a heavy, thunderous blizzard. Days later, one of the men is alone in the storeroom and hears scratching at the outside door. Really scary stuff here with this isolated atmosphere, the temperature being like 60 below zero. Nothing alive should be outside those doors. The man opens the door, he begins screaming, and then the reader is left guessing at his demise. This sort of thing plays out again with a different guy on the team, so then that leaves just 3 survivors, and then things get really, really creepy. Days later, one of the men tells the others that through the window, he saw both of the dead men standing out in the snow. Whoa. There's discussion among the men that ancient people in that area believed something supernatural lived in the ice or sort of embodied the ice. Needless to say, things happen, and eventually we're left with one survivor who's armed with a gun and basically just hanging on to his own sanity, knowing he's the next victim. But what is the thing in the ice? Is it a ghost? A creature? Is it the devil himself? I like that Glaspie leaves it all subjective. There is an ending to the story, but it sort of leaves it loose. I know I keep saying through this whole episode how much I loved what I read, but seriously, a lot of great fiction on this episode, and this story is just so good. I love books set in snowy places or in blizzards. One of my favorite horror films is John Carpenter's The Thing, and this book had some serious The Thing vibes, which in itself was based on a 1938 novella called Who Goes There? It's mostly what I consider a horror story, but I guess you could lump the story in as science fiction with the possibility that the evil thing is from another world or planet. Regardless of whatever genre you want to call it, this was a great reading experience. You can get Pulp Adventures for $10 on Amazon, and as I mentioned earlier, it has this novella and a bunch of other great content. Alright, so that wraps up the main part of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Stick around to hear my reading of Jack Finney's The Third Level, but if you're bailing out here, remember to check out our YouTube channel for weekly videos, at this point almost daily videos, and also follow us on Facebook and X. Also be sure to watch the shopping video because you're going to really enjoy it. Be sure to subscribe and follow. The rest of you, get ready to time travel. Jack Finney's short story The Third Level is featured in the American short story collection The Third Level, which was published in 1957. That same collection was published in England as The Clock of Time in 1958. As I mentioned earlier, Stephen King cites Jack Finney and this specific story as an influence on his work. I've also found that this story, for whatever reason, is used a lot online by English teachers in other countries. Just type the title in on a YouTube search, and you'll see countless English instructors dissecting this story. I'm not sure why that is or what the link is, but regardless, it's all over YouTube. And I'm going to read the story to you now, and it's quite short, so just fair warning. I think it's only like 7 pages. The presidents of the New York Central and the New York, New Haven, and Hartford railroads will swear on a stack of timetables that there are only 2. But I say there are 3 because I've been on the 3rd level at Grand Central Station. Yes, I've taken the obvious step. I talked to a psychiatrist friend of mine, among others. I told him about the 3rd level at Grand Central Station, and he said it was a waking dream wish fulfillment. He said I was unhappy. That made my wife kind of mad, but he explained that he meant the modern world is full of insecurity, fear, war, worry, and all the rest of it, and that I just want to escape. Well, hell, who doesn't? Everybody I know wants to escape. They don't wander down into any 3rd level at Grand Central Station. But that's the reason, he said, and my friends all agreed. Everything points to it, they claimed. My stamp collecting, for example. That's a temporary refuge from reality. Well, maybe, but my grandfather didn't need any refuge from reality. Things were pretty nice and peaceful in his day, from all I hear, and he started my collection. It's a nice collection, too. Blocks of 4 of practically every U.S. issue, first day covers, and so on. President Roosevelt collected stamps, too, you know. Anyway, here's what happened at Grand Central. One night last summer, I worked late at the office. I was in a hurry to get uptown to my apartment, so I decided to take the subway from Grand Central because it's faster than the bus. Now, I don't know why this should have happened to me. I'm just an ordinary guy named Charlie, 31 years old, and I'm wearing a tan gabardine suit and a straw hat with a fancy band. I passed a dozen men who looked just like me. I wasn't trying to escape from anything. I just wanted to get home to Louisa, my wife. I turned into Grand Central from Vanderbilt Avenue and went down the steps to the 1st level, where you take trains like the 20th century. Then I walked down another flight to the 2nd level, where the suburban trains leave from, ducked into an arched doorway heading for the subway, and got lost. That's easy to do. I've been in and out of Grand Central hundreds of times, but I'm always bumping into new doorways and stairs and corridors. Once I got into a tunnel about a mile long and came out in the lobby of the Roosevelt Hotel. Another time I came up in an office building on 46th Street, 3 blocks away. Sometimes I think Grand Central is growing like a tree, pushing out new corridors and staircases like roots. There's probably a long tunnel that nobody knows about, feeling its way under the city right now, on its way to Times Square and maybe another to Central Park. And maybe, because for so many people through the years, Grand Central has been an exit, a way of escape. Maybe that's how the tunnel I got into, but I never told my psychiatrist friend about that idea. The corridor I was in began angling left and slanting downward, and I thought that was wrong, but I just kept on walking. All I could hear was the empty sound of my own footsteps, and I didn't pass a soul. Then I heard that sort of hollow roar ahead that means open space and people talking. The tunnel turned sharp left. I went down a short flight of stairs and came out on the third level at Grand Central Station. For just a moment, I thought I was back on the second level, but I saw the room was smaller. There were fewer ticket windows and train gates, and the information booth in the center was wood and old looking, and the man in the booth wore a green eye shade and long black sleeve protectors. The lights were dim and sort of flickering. Then I saw why. They were open flame gas lights. There were brass spittoons on the floor, and across the station a glint of light caught my eye. A man was pulling a gold watch from his vest pocket. He snapped open the cover, glanced at his watch, and frowned. He wore a derby hat, a black four-button suit with tiny lapels, and he had a big black handlebar mustache. Then I looked around and saw that everyone in the station was dressed like 1890-something. I never saw so many beards, sideburns, and fancy mustaches in my life. A woman walked into the train gate. She wore a dress with leg-of-button sleeves and skirts to the top of her high-buttoned shoes. Back of her, out on the tracks, I caught a glimpse of a locomotive, a very small Currier and Ives locomotive with a funnel-shaped stack, and then I knew. To make sure, I walked over to a newsboy and glanced at the stack of papers at his feet. It was The World, and The World hasn't been published for years. The lead story said something about President Cleveland. I've found that front page since in the public library files, and it was printed June 11th, 1894. I turned toward the ticket windows, knowing that here, on the third level at Grand Central, I could buy tickets that would take Louisa and me anywhere in the United States we wanted to go in the year 1894, and I wanted 2 tickets to Galesburg, Illinois. Have you ever been there? It's a wonderful town still, with big old frame houses, huge lawns, and tremendous trees whose branches meet overhead and roof the streets. And in 1894, summer evenings were twice as long, and people sat out on their lawns, the men smoking cigars and talking quietly, the women waving palm leaf fans with the fireflies all around, in a peaceful world. To be back there, with the First World War still 20 years off, and World War II over 40 years in the future. I wanted 2 tickets for that. The clerk figured the fare. He glanced at my fancy hatband, but he figured the fare, and I had enough for 2 coach tickets, one way. But when I counted out the money and looked up, the clerk was staring at me. He nodded at the bills. "That ain't money, mister," he said, "and if you're trying to skin me, you won't get very far." And he glanced at the cash drawer beside him. Of course, the money in his drawer was old-style bills, half again as big as the money we use nowadays and different looking. I turned away and got out fast. There's nothing nice about jail, even in 1894. And that was that. I left the same way I came, I suppose. Next day, during lunch hour, I drew $300 out of the bank, nearly all we had, and bought old-style currency. That really worried my psychiatrist friend. You can buy old money at almost any coin dealer's, but you have to pay a premium. My $300 bought less than $200 in old-style bills. But I didn't care. Eggs were 13 cents a dozen in 1894. But I've never again found the corridor that leads to the third level at Grand Central Station, although I've often tried. Louisa was pretty worried when I told her all this and didn't want me to look for the third level anymore, and after a while, I stopped. I went back to my stamps. But now we're both looking every weekend, because now we have proof that the third level is still there. My friend Sam Weiner disappeared. Nobody knew where, but I sort of suspected because Sam's a city boy, and I used to tell him about Galesburg. I went to school there, and he always said he liked the sound of the place. And that's where he is, all right, in 1894. Because one night, fussing with my stamp collection, I found, well, do you know what a first day cover is? When a new stamp is issued, stamp collectors buy some and use them to mail envelopes to themselves on the very first day of sale, and the postmark proves the date. The envelope is called a first day cover. They're never opened, you just put blank paper in the envelope. That night, among my oldest first day covers, I found one that shouldn't have been there. But there it was. It was there because someone had mailed it to my grandfather at his home in Galesburg. That's what the address on the envelope said. And it had been there since July 18, 1894. The postmark showed that, yet I didn't remember it at all. The stamp was a 6-cent dull brown with a picture of President Garfield. Naturally, when the envelope came to Granddad in the mail, it went right into this collection and stayed there, till I took it out and opened it. The paper inside wasn't blank. It read, 941 Willard Street, Galesburg, Illinois, July 18, 1894. Charlie, I got to wishing that you were right. Then I got to believing you were right. And Charlie, it's true. I found the third level. I've been here 2 weeks, and right now, down the street at the Dailies, someone is playing a piano, and they're all out on the front porch singing Seeing Nellie Home. And I'm invited over for lemonade. Come on back, Charlie and Louisa. Keep looking until you find the third level. It's worth it, believe me. The note was signed Sam. And the stamp and coin store I go to, I found out that Sam bought $800 worth of old-style currency. That ought to set him up in a nice little hay, feed, and grain business. He always said that's what he really wished he could do, and he certainly can't go back to his old business. Not in Galesburg, Illinois, in 1894. His old business? Why, Sam was my psychiatrist. All right, that's the end of Jack Finney's The Third Level. Hope you enjoyed that, and it kind of circles back to something I mentioned in the feature about Finney's books and stories always featuring characters that want something else. They're always dreaming of a life that they want to have or live. They're always dreaming of greener grass, I guess is what you could say. So I really hope you enjoyed that. I can see from reading Stephen King like half my life and all the short stories and things like that. But anyway, that's not neither here nor there. But hope you enjoyed this story. Hope you enjoyed this whole episode. And definitely come back in about 2 weeks. I'm going to have another episode for you. It's going to be awesome. And I'm not going to tell you too much, but it's about an author that may hold the Guinness Book of World Record for the most books written. So stay tuned for that. Again, follow us on Facebook, X. Remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm posting videos there left and right. And take care, and I hope you stick around for the next episode.